are today with Martin Lycka, the SVP for American Regulatory Affairs and Responsible Gambling. It's great to catch up with you. How are you today, Martin?
Good morning. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm wonderful. So let's get straight ahead. So we are sitting here at Summit in Barcelona, SBC 2023. Do you think the event is doing enough to promote player protection and responsible gambling this year so far?
Oh, it absolutely does. As you might know, they had a dedicated player protection symposium, SBC Embrace the Cause. They've had that symposium and other similar initiatives for quite some time. So I'm delighted to report that they are indeed doing well when it comes to player protection and responsible gambling.
That's great to hear. The Entain Foundation is working to educate athletes about the risk of sports gambling. Do you believe your engagement with player athletes conveys effectively why they should avoid these practices, or are you still exploring the area?
Well, some of those projects are fairly new, but we're hopeful that we've already managed to change the perception of the industry and even more importantly started educating athletes, also the loved ones, about the need to get themselves educated about responsible gambling. And quite frankly, the key message these programs seek to deliver is simply the fact that the athletes should not be betting. If they can avoid it, they actually shouldn't be betting at all, but at the very least they shouldn't be betting on their own sport.
Absolutely.
That could have nefarious consequences for them.
There have been recent scandals in the U.S. sports related to unauthorized wagers. Do you think it is a consequence of widespread sports betting legalization, or is it a result of bringing it to the guarded market, regulated market, instead of enough offshore gambling?
Well, the fact that the US finally, after all these years, back in 2018, and as we will know, it goes state by state, but the fact that it started regulating or legalized sports betting and then started regulating the market state by state is absolutely critical to protection of both athletes, but also the wider populace. So I'd like to applaud the fact that they have gotten that across the proverbial line. At the same time, there's still a lot of work to be done. There's no doubt about that. There's constant exposure to sports wagering-related advertising for starters. It's also needless to say that athletes are notoriously competitive, and they also happen to have access to inside information. So what I'm trying to say is that the level of temptation is very, very high. So to answer your question, athletes do need to be continuously educated. As an industry, we need to step up. The sports governing bodies need to step up further as well. But that's a good thing that we can operate in a regulated environment. And of course, scandals to some extent, they are unavoidable, but I should be hopeful that there will be fewer and fewer of them. We already talked about the fact that any such scandal could ruin those guys and girls' careers, in particular if they happen to be at colleges. So don't do that. Don't bet. Wait until you've retired, and then that's what you choose to do. Do it.
Irresponsibly.
Although,
yeah. In general, how do you assess the success of educational programs targeting specific organizations like NCAA and MLS?
Well, couple of elements in all honesty. So I've talked about exposure to sports betting, so exposure to education is critical. So you can be cynical and say it's the number of sessions, it's the number of athletes, but we're really trying, together with our great partner, Epic Risk Management, talk right to the hearts and minds of the athletes. So we do get a lot of feedback. So feedback is the first element. It may sound cheesy, but it's gratifying to read through the feedback, which has been 99.9% positive. It's also gratifying to see some of those athletes who, throughout the sessions or after the sessions, may have come to the conclusion that perhaps they may be running a risk of developing gambling addiction, would pluck up the courage, because it takes some guts, it takes some courage, and come to the lecturer, the facilitator, and raise that issue. So that's another form of assessing it. It's more by guts, if you will, because it's very difficult to put figures or apply metrics to it. And ultimately, and that's the final point that I would make, it's also the fact that these programs have been reported upon in the press. We did TV interviews and all that. So that's another way of spreading the word, and then it starts snowballing. And we've had, to your point about NCAA, but also MLS, again, together with Epic Risk Management, we started relatively small at the central level of these organizations. But these days, because the ball is rolling, the Epic guys would typically get approached by individual colleges. So the program happens to be oversubscribed. We could do more. We'd love to do more. The same goes for MLS, the other organizations that we've partnered up.
Keeping that in mind and looking at the broader gambling industry, do you believe that today's operators and companies prioritize responsible gambling as the primary mission in providing entertainment to players?
We're getting there. We might answer whether it's the primary mission. Again, I wouldn't want to be coming across as too cynical, but a primary mission of every business is to make money and cater to its people. Most importantly, employees, but of course, obviously also indirectly customers. But responsible gambling and the wider player protection piece is definitely up there. Still, I will sound like a broken record, there's still a lot of work to be done, but everybody's embraced the cause. It's not as though, as quite frankly was the case 5-6 years ago, that nobody would be talking about responsible gambling, or nobody would be considering it when defining their objectives. At the same time, I wouldn't want to be giving the impression that it's all hunky-dory, we're done, and we can move on.
So slow and steady is a progress.
That's one way.
What changes do you think are necessary in a current approach to the responsible gambling within the industry to make it safer in general for players specifically?
Well, I suppose the one issue that we are phenomenal, if you will, we haven't cracked yet is players' participation. A lot of surveys and other forms of sounding out how players may be feeling while playing, but it's extremely difficult. Because in land-based environment, it may be slightly easier, more efficient. At the same time, they don't necessarily have the technology that we do have. So I wouldn't want to go into the proverbial online versus offline mudslinging. Not by any means. So what I'm trying to say is that historically, where the industry would have struggled would have been to glean the feelings of our customers, the feelings of their players. So I think that's a challenge, and it's something that by means of both interaction with customers, but also technology, because that allows us to glean their behavior, we've been working on to improve. So that's one. Plus, I suppose the other, it's not necessarily a challenge, because again, legislators, regulators have widely embraced responsible gambling by now. It's only slowly, in at least some instances, creeping its way into regulation, which is a good thing, because at the same time, there are sadly certain countries that seem to be overdoing it. It's going into the opposite extreme. Certain jurisdictions that might have found that draconian restrictions would help protect customers, and I very much argue that that's not the case, that we would be looking for a proverbial compromise that would reflect the need to run an efficient business that caters to the needs, including the well-being of its patrons, but on the other hand, it operates in a clearly, even strictly defined environment.
So is there a rule for cross-jurisdiction learning? For instance, comparing the United States to certain European jurisdiction, it seems the US is more open to advertising.
That's absolutely the case. Let's see if that changes. going forward. There are certain proposals, as you will be aware, even in the Federal Congress, to restrict sports betting-related advertising. To answer your question about the cross-pollination across the pond, if you will, absolutely. Numerous US states would have drawn lessons from European regulations and vice versa. So these days, the two-way traffic is most definitely the two-way traffic between Europe and North America is definitely working. The same goes for Latin America. Brazil, so they're frozen regulating, and I'm told that when it comes to the implementing regulation, they will have drawn a lot of inspiration from the existing regulations from all around. The short answer to your question is yes.
And speaking of consumers, are they increasingly aware of responsible and safe gambling? Are they every day there's a progress, or do you seem to think otherwise?
I think there will be a stretch to say that every day there's a progress.
Absolutely.
Because as you said, that there is progress. Slow and steady. It's been slow and steady. But it's fair to say that the industry has certainly stepped up on the front of providing even more prominent and visible responsible gambling messaging, both on the sides, on the operator sides, but also in the external environment, so in the media and elsewhere. So most definitely awareness has risen. Plus, I suppose it's fair to say, and all you guys are far younger than me, that your generation, if I may put it that way, for want of better expression, is far more conscious and cognizant of the fact that, or would rather spend, if we rephrase it, would rather spend money with the ethical businesses than any other businesses, which necessarily would not have necessarily been the case in the past.
Absolutely. How can we assist consumers who are overly focused on the game and might be neglecting the principles of responsible gambling?
So if I may use an Entain example, the technology we've developed, so in the heart of its heart, it originally was the technology that for years and years we'd used for bonusing purposes. At some point we realized that the logic to apply here is, if not the same, then very, very similar. Because what we're seeking to achieve is to personalize, individualize these tools as much as we can. Just what would work for you wouldn't necessarily work for me, and vice versa when it comes to consumer protections. To finally answer your question, there are lots of folks that are so engrossed into the game that they're not perceiving anything else. So that's the reason why I started talking about technology, because the technology we've got, and to be fair, few others have got, allows us to, if need be, even take over control of the site. So it would be pop-up messages. You spend this much time on the site, and this is your P&L, and you may want to consider taking a pause because there's much more to life.
Absolutely.
Balls outside. But as I've said, if in that instance the player's still trying to click those annoying RG messages away, annoying from the player's perspective,
yes,
then we would leave that player no choice but take over the site. So that's that tool. If alarm bells were to be ringing across the gambling addiction board, then we would close down that player's account, exclude the player, and put him on the firm afterwards recovery. This is how we would go about it. Plus, as I keep saying, other industry members will be the same.
Of course. I think the last question in gaming world this time, in general, what lies ahead in the U.S. gambling industry, and do you expect stakeholders to prioritize consumer protection before it becomes a public debate as it did in Europe?
So I take it 2 questions, 2 answers. So first, the crystal ball glazing exercise 35 plus US states and state and the obvious have regulated sports betting by now. There are still a few left. Of course, not all 50 of them will regulate. That would be foolish to believe. But next year, quite a few states in the so-called Southern Belt, the Alabamas, the Georgias, the South Carolinas of this world will have a go. We'll still have to wait for Texas and California. No play to be had there until next year. So that's sports betting. But of course, what would be critical for the future sustainability, including commercial sustainability of the US markets, is regulation of online casino or iGaming. Because as you will know, it has been a slow burner. Only to compare it to the 30 plus states that have regulated sports betting, only 8 US states have regulated online casino. And then we will again try to come across as too cynical, to put it bluntly in human speak. Online casino, that's where the good money is. Well, sports betting is still very good money, but online casino normally sustains this industry across the piece. So I would like to think that the likes of Indiana, Illinois, most definitely New York, will have another go at least trying to regulate online casino. And in terms of consumer protection, these days it's pretty much a no-brainer. You will be aware of the fact that quite a few states have started, for example, they have started phasing out the bonus-related deductions. So that's the first. Secondly, we've already touched upon the fact that there have been certain projects and initiatives to restrict US-facing advertising. Well, let's see how these will pan out. And of course, finally, and that will be absolutely crucial for the future of the US markets, other states, I would suggest, will follow in the footsteps, and they will follow the example of the likes of New Jersey, Ohio, Colorado, New York, and the other states that have put in place a robust set of responsible gambling standards.
Great. Thank you very much. That's all from me. Anything you might want to add?
Thanks for having me.